What is up, you guys, and welcome back to another episode of Drew's Automobile Wonders. As I continue my Vehicles That I've Owned series, this is the final installment of the series. This is my 1977 GMC K15 that I once owned. And I think you guys are going to like this one a whole lot because this particular K15 would end up becoming a Hollywood vehicle tribute clone. Of which I've always wanted to do a Hollywood tribute vehicle, and I finally had the opportunity to do it. So I ended up making this truck a clone of the Fall Guy truck from the TV show The Fall Guy. Now, before I get into details on how I fixed this truck up, I want to give a brief background on what the Fall Guy was about. It was a TV show that aired in the early 80s and ended in the mid 80s. It starred Lee Majors as a character known as Colt Seavers, who was a stuntman that moonlighted as a bounty hunter, and this truck was made famous by him. And it was basically a four-wheel drive General Lee throughout the entire series, as it was well known for its stunts as well as its jumps. Mainly its jumps, though. A lot of sequences where they jumped a stunt truck, of which I will get to details in as we go on. But I'm going to start from the beginning, where I brought the truck home. As you can see in this picture, this was the day I brought it home. I bought it off a fella right here in Dearborn, as a matter of fact. I paid $2,200 for it. It ran and drove just fine. Ran like a top, and that's a lot of the reason I bought it, is because it was, mechanically sound, and I didn't have to worry about the engine or anything like that, or the drivetrain. Everything had been kept up on. It was all cosmetic stuff. As you can see, it was pretty rusty. The cab, everything from the back of the cab forward was pretty rusty. Another thing I didn't have to worry about, though, was the bed. The bed was very solid on this. The guy I bought it off of, that's basically all he did to this truck was put the bed on it. He had bought it off the original owner, and he only put the bed on it. So I considered myself technically the second owner as far as being active with this truck. So as you can see, the bed was, again, it was very solid. It was definitely a later bed. I know the gas caps, the gas doors on it are of later design, but it had the dual saddle tanks on it, and it had 33s on it. As you can see in these pictures, they weren't 35s, those are 33s. It did not rub. It would eventually end up rubbing when I got done with it, because I would end up putting wheels with more offset on them. But everything worked on this truck too. Everything was functional for the most part. It had a small block 350 in it, all stock, bone stock, small block 350 in it. The truck had approximately 140,000 miles on it. But he claimed that the motor had been gone through, which I ended up seeing the proof in the pudding when I tore into the motor later on. We'll get to that here in a minute. But and the biggest reason I bought the truck, of course, is because it's a 4-speed, or it was a 4-speed. And another thing I liked is that it had the older style four-wheel drive lever on the floor there, as you can see, as it stands straight up. But as you can see, it was looks like it was once Z-barded, but again, it was still pretty rusty. Like, they just Z-barded it once and didn't keep up on underneath and washing it and stuff. And once I started tearing into the interior and pulled the carpets out, I could really see how bad it really was, and it was pretty bad. So I ended up buying a bunch of parts to repair the cab with, because I was going to go in on it like I did my F100, having the experience I had before, only these parts were more readily available and they cost half as much. So what I ended up doing was cutting the cab apart, but what I would eventually end up coming across on Facebook Market was a fella had a rebuilt cab for sale down in a little town in Ohio known as Republic, and this cab I ended up paying $350 for. and the floors had been replaced, the rockers had been replaced. It wasn't perfect. It still had some dings and dents in it, and it actually had some unfinished fab work, as a matter of fact. But I made it work, and we scooped up. As a matter of fact, it was actually the first trip I had made with my trailer. This was the first time I had used my trailer for something after I had bought it in the previous winter. But it was rainy, it was kind of drizzly out, and we hauled it back. And we had kind of an elaborate way of getting it off the trailer. We had to kind of use engine rollers to get it off the trailer, but we made it work, and luckily we didn't damage anything. And I ended up primering it all around and painting the firewall with the rubberized undercoat and stuff, and it's kind of a sound deafener too. It looked all right when it was done, in terms of keeping it from rusting and all that. Like I said, it was a rust-free cab. And this cab, I decided, because it was so cheap, I ended up going to get it. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going through the headache of, redoing another cab like I did the F100. So why do that when I could just put a new cab on it? And I have the opportunity to do it, so I did. Here was our elaborate plan to take the old cab off. We ended up bolting this plank to the seat mounts where the seat mounted, and we ended up using it that way to pull it up. It was kind of like picking the arc up, and we ended up pulling the cab off that way. We didn't do that with the new cab. We actually just kind of it took 3 guys to get the new cab on, as a matter of fact. But as you can see in these next pictures here, we completely ripped the cab off, and this is the first time I'd ever ripped the cab off the truck, and whereas the F100, it was just the bed I took apart and took off, and I cut that off before putting a new one on. But as you can see, we got the new cab on there, and it looked very clean cut. It lined right up too. It didn't have any issues. Here's all the parts I started primering: the doors, the fenders, the hood. I got all new doors, fenders, and hood for it. And then I started putting them on the truck, and as you can see, that everything kind of lined up. The doors are kind of cheesy, but the doors were Chinese repops, so it was kind of expected. So we had to work with them. I didn't want to return them or anything, so we made them work. Needless to say. So, and after that, we ended up started painting the inside, of course, and I ended up using Cordova brown, and I actually had to order it off the internet because they didn't have it in the stores. But I rattle canned it. The only thing I didn't do, and I kind of regretted doing, was using clear coat, but it still stuck pretty good, and I didn't really have to worry about it, especially putting all the new interior stuff in there. Now the windshield, I ended up breaking in the process of taking the hood off once the first time. But it was pretty fogged up anyways. The film was coming apart in it, so I wanted to replace it anyways, so it worked out. And the windshield I ended up getting from the junkyard. I scored it for about $30, and it was very nice. It did not have the antenna going up the center like the old one did. The old one had the antenna that went up the center, and that's actually what was contributing to the film deteriorating in the middle of the windshield. But it worked out. And then we put the back window in. Now the back window was a pain in the ass to put in. That was probably one of the most difficult parts of this whole project, was putting that back window in. And it was something that, I really don't want to do again. But if I have to, I will. As you can see, here it is all finished up. It had the cab was pretty much ready to go in terms of paint on the outside. And as you can see, I redid the heater box, and I had to put a whole new heater core in it. After that, it worked out pretty good. I just kind of oiled it up a little bit before I put it back in there. Then we started putting the wiring harness in, and everything. And then I started mocking up the dash a little bit too, as a matter of fact. Putting the instrument panel on and everything. I ended up taking the cover back off, of course, but I wanted to see what it looked like. I just ended up painting the dash cover. Now the transmission center there, that the hump, I ended up actually carrying over from the old cab because the old cab was an automatic. And then as you can see here, I put the column in, and everything accordingly. All the pedals and stuff are in. And from there on, it was pretty much kind of reassemble. Now these parts here that come up here, I actually had to go across the state to get the roll bar, which I scored for $100, and it wasn't in the best condition. It was quite rusty at the bottom. As you can see, that little clamp right there was actually hiding a rot spot, but it was where the sun don't shine once it was in the bed, so I didn't care. But I still had to do a lot of cleaning on this. In fact, it was painted at one point, so I had to strip a lot of paint off of it, and I finally ended up making it work. It didn't look too bad when it was done, but it wasn't the greatest either. But I went across the state also to get this brush guard, as well as the that blower box. As my blower box was rotted out, I ended up getting that off of a former coworker of mine out in Dansville, and then I went all the way over to the west side of the state to grab that push bar, or brush guard rather. They do not make those anymore, and I learned that very quickly trying to look for one. So that's why I ended up going across the state. Same with the roll bar too. It's hard to find those roll bars unless you pay $800 for one on Summit Racing, and I was like, wow, $800, and it's not even functional steel. It's ornamental use only, and $800. I'm sorry, it's not worth it for some chrome steel that will just rust like this one did over the years. But it looked all right after I got in the bed. But as you can see, you started putting the fenders, the inner and outers on, and then we put the hood on, and the front fascia kind of started mocking it up, and then it was ready to paint pretty much from here on. As you see, we ended up getting it running, and it lit right up just like I parked it. I mean, like I said, that thing ran so good. As you can see, we got it ready to go paint and get painted. And then what we ended up doing was, believe it or not, we actually took it to Mako to get it painted, and they had a perfect brown for it that it wasn't the factory color, but it was very, 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 very close. In fact, you couldn't tell the difference looking at it, as a matter of fact. It was a nice metallic brown, and the guy did a great job painting it, and it only cost $600, but this paint job was really good, and it stuck. There was no chips or anything it was nothing chipped on, ended up chipping on it or anything like that, unless we, there were a couple of chips here and there from working on it, but other than that, it wasn't anything that any other paint job wouldn't have gotten. So once I got it home, I started dressing it up. I started, as you can see, I painted the brush guard. I ended up putting it on there, and then I got the roll bar all situated, and putting that on there. And it just, everything kind of fell in line after that. The hardest part was the windows, and like I said, we ended up actually messing the paint up. I had to touch it up, which it didn't look too bad after. You could tell I touched it up, of course, but it all worked out, and I ended up actually putting a roll bar in at that point. And then, as you can see, we put the windows in, and then I started putting the lights on it. I ended up getting those lights off of Summit. They're the Hella lights, as a lot of guys buy them for rallycross and stuff like that. Now, I mounted the one sideways on the roll bar, but I ended up taking the covers off because the covers only go on one way, and I was like, yeah, that's not going to work, so I just left them off. But when I ended up putting the top ones on, it really, really started looking right. And then what I ended up doing was putting clearance lamps up on the cab, because this cab happened to have holes for clearance lamps. So it ended up looking a lot more right than it would have with the old cab on it, because the Fall Guy truck actually had clearance lamps because it was a 3/4 ton. Now, while granted this was a 1/2 ton, it was still destined to kind of look the part, which is cool. I ended up ripping that seat out of the Suburban. It was a really crappy seat, but I was throwing it out, but it needed a seat, and that was to hold it over until I got a seat. And I ended up putting, the new vinyl floor in. I ended up going from carpet to vinyl, because vinyl's a whole lot better, in my opinion, to use and a lot easier to take care of. Now, the seat, I ended up scoring from that same coworker I scored the blower box from out in Dansville. I hauled it back in the Suburban. It's funny, it was the same day I hauled the hood back and helped the buddy pull an axle out of the junkyard. But anyways, then we got around doing the graphics. Now, the graphics didn't look the greatest. The thing about it is, like the paint, and and the roll bar and stuff. I didn't want this truck to be perfect. And to me, in my eyes, it doesn't have to be perfect to be nice. But I planned on driving this truck every day if I wanted to, or taking it, on road trips and stuff like that. And, I didn't want something I wanted to lose sleep over trying to take care of, because I already have a vehicle that I end up kind of doing that. I didn't need to. So, we ended up using, sign graphics, as a matter of fact, to do the stripe. I ended up painting the door panels, and they looked okay when they were done. Unfortunately, one ended up breaking, and I had to actually go without it. I'll get to that in the future, but ended up continuing on the graphics. I actually had the decal, the Fall Guy Stuntman Association decal, printed at a sign shop. It was straight off the internet, and honestly, they were worried about pixelation. And as you can see in the picture, you can't really tell it's pixelated. It had a little bit of pixelation, but it wasn't bad enough to where I was worried about it. I was like, yeah, they'll get it. They'll understand what it is. So it turned out really nice to me. And I couldn't wait to get it on the truck. But then in the mail came the wheels. I ended up getting Kreger wagon wheels, of course, in chrome. When I got them, I was pretty satisfied. I got to say, that was a nice set of wheels for the money. What you pay for them, I mean, you get what you pay for it. And I'll tell you what, actually more than you pay for it, because these wheels were only $500. Versus, American Forces or anything crazy like that, which I'm not into that shit. So, anyways, I ended up getting the decal mocked up, and you won't believe it, but we got it mocked up, made sure it was kind of the right size, and it was good enough for me. So we peeled it off paper, and in one shot, we got it perfect. I mean, perfectly straight. And when I looked at it after it was done, I was like, hell yes. We don't have to peel it back up and move it and anything like that. It was all one shot. We got it straight perfectly. Only thing I had to end up doing was taking a couple of bubbles out, but other than that, it went on perfectly. So then we finished up, finishing up the graphics some more, and then once it was done, as you can see in the back there's still some dings and dents, and like I said, it wasn't perfect, but I didn't want it perfect. There was a few flaws in the graphics, of course. We had to cut them up and move them around and stuff, but when you looked at it from this far away here, you couldn't tell much different, could you? So, and it was like that in person. I ended up putting a CB antenna on it at that point. The dash I ended up finally putting together. The only thing I never ended up doing was putting a glove box in it, because I ended up getting rid of this truck before I had the opportunity to. So it was kind of, in a way, unfinished, but it was just a little bit of tedious stuff like that. Then I finally put the side molding on it, and once I put the side molding on it, it really popped at that point. And then the day after, I ended up taking it back out. I got it on the road, and I ended up taking it out on the road. And then, before you knew it, it was finished. Or at least finished enough to be presentable. Once I got it on the road, it was an instant head turner. I mean, and like I said, I'm not looking to impress anybody. I do this all for myself, but it was quite interesting to see how many people, look to see, and then there were people out there that knew what the truck was, but they were very surprised to see a guy in his late 20s like me driving around in this clone and knew what this TV show was, because a lot of guys my age, of course, they don't know this TV show. They know the Dukes of Hazzard and Knight Rider, but this show was a lot less popular. At least nowadays, it's not remembered as much. So when the older fellas that did remember this show see me and see this truck, they were pretty pleased with it. They were very appreciative. They knew that I appreciate the old things like that, and I like that I presented myself as such, and I ended up taking my harness out of my race car. Now, I didn't use the top belts. They were for decoration. I just mounted them to the floor, and I know you're not supposed to do that as a race car driver. I would know. So they were just for ornamental use, but I ended up using the bottom parts of the harness. It looked cool just sitting there, and it was better than having no seatbelt at all. So I ended up eventually putting bed liners in it, rolling, actually brushed in. I've discovered brushing in bed liner works a whole lot better than rolling it in, because you get a lot more cavities and so on. And the reason why I did that, I'll get to that in a minute. But this truck, man, it was just so cool. It was fun to drive too. And if I kept it, I was gonna definitely do more work to it, cosmetically. I was gonna end up lifting it 6 inches and put 35s on it to make it more like the Fall Guy truck. But proportionately, it looked good with the 33s, and the offset on the new wheels, I think they were -44 offset. So they stuck out more. The only drawback was they did end up rubbing on the fenders. But if I had, like I said, though, if I had lifted it, it would have been a whole lot better. But the thing is, I had decided to put it in Autorama. And I wasn't going to do it. It was kind of a last minute decision. I ended up putting it in Autorama, and it actually won 4th place, I believe. That was such a fun experience, and there was so many people that liked this truck. And of course, you had a couple of assholes that pointed out the flaws in it. But you overlooked that, and especially when the kids came around and saw like, Mom, look how big this truck is. To them it's big, and it was really cool for them to appreciate the old things like that. It's like I would want to raise my kids to look at these things as the same way. So it was really cool to see that. And like I said, this was a whole new experience, and I plan on doing it again in the future with different vehicles. So I'm glad I got to experience it and learn how cool it is. So after the Autorama, I finally decided that I was going to start tearing into this motor. And now the thing about this motor is it was already gone through. It didn't smoke. It ran like a top. And I wanted it to run better. So knowing me, I can't leave anything alone. So this motor would end up coming apart, and would end up getting a cam and cylinder heads. Now, of course, it wasn't like the G8. It was, very mild, truck lean stuff. But I wanted a hot rod truck, basically. Hot rod 4x4. I wasn't pulling logs with it, so I proceeded to collect parts. And parts I did collect. I got lifters and all the, essential stuff to, redo the get everything that I was tearing into. Everything that was preventative on it, I ended up getting for it. Timing set, gaskets, and whatnot. I got new push rods, but I didn't end up using those. I ended up reusing the ones that were in it because they were solid push rods, which were better. So I ended up getting, as you can see, lifters, and I ended up putting them all in the box and whatnot. And I ended up getting a 160-degree T-stat. And the cylinder heads I ended up getting at first were Vortec, but I discovered they were cracked, so I ended up getting rid of those, and I got these 487 heads. These 487 heads are essentially camel humps with bigger combustion chambers. But I picked these up for $170. I knew they would still flow very, very well, and I would end up making them flow better yet. The thing is, I also used a smaller gasket on it as well to up the compression a little bit. Like I said, these are low compression heads, but they still had the same flow as, or very similar flow as the camel humps. So I figured, you know what, run a smaller gasket, and then take the heads and break them down and clean them up. Take the buzzer to them, and there was nothing wrong with them really in terms of cosmetics. I didn't have to, really resurface them or anything. It was nice, even. I measured everything up. Everything was still nice and even on them. The thing is, I looked down in the valves, and I decided in the ports, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to port this thing, and I'm going to make it flow a whole lot better yet. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting Dremels and stuff out, and I started hand porting them, and it took me a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, to port them with work and stuff going on. But I had never really ported cylinder heads before. I have to be honest, and this was kind of my first time, so I took advantage of it, and I ended up porting the intake side too. As you can see, here's a before after, and it was fun. And I knew these heads would be very, first time porter friendly, because they were very thick casting, and I wouldn't, go all the way through. I knew I wouldn't go all the way through, which I kind of feared with the Vortex had I ported those. But I wouldn't have had to have anyways, because they still flow. Vortex cylinder heads on a small block Chevy, for those who don't know, flow very, very well. So then I ended up cleaning up after and painting them, and I painted them a nice, beautiful gloss black, and it looked really, really good when it was done. Then the intake I actually scored in a trade. I had a Vortex intake that I had bought, and I ended up trading it for this Edelbrock EPS intake, and I actually ended up getting a carburetor with it too. I believe it was a 600 Holley, but the problem with the carburetor was, as you can see, I had the rebuild kit and stuff ordered for it, and I actually ended up getting stock exhaust gaskets, and then as you can see, I got undersized head gaskets as well. I believe they were 18 thou. But as you can see, I ended up getting the carburetor. It was technically free, because I'd paid so little for the Vortex intake when I got it. So I had nothing to lose with this carburetor really. But once I started looking at it, it was pretty chewed up. I mean, to the point where even the rebuild kit didn't offer the parts that I needed to kind of make it perfect. And something happened during the rebuild, or something just wasn't right the whole time, because we ended up putting it on the truck when it was done, and it would not run worth a shit. So we ended up putting the Quadrajet back on anyways, which ran way better, and it worked out. So, but it was fun experiencing the rebuild. So I took it apart and put it all back together. The cam I used was a Summit Racing 1103 camshaft, which was a very mild cam. It offered good torque as well as good horsepower as well. I didn't want, most of one or the other. I wanted to pump up both of those numbers. So this was kind of the perfect mid-range cam for that. And then I ended up, taking the heads and detailing them, and once again, they looked very good when they were done. Put new valve springs in them. Actually, I take that back. I believe we reused those valve springs, because it didn't need valve springs for as mild as the cam was. We reused the valves, of course. I cleaned the valves up before putting them back in. Got new wires for it, of course, and always getting my trusty NGK spark plugs, V-Power. I know a lot of guys will be like, oh, why do you use AC Delco plugs? Well, guess what? Those NGKs work just fine. If anything, they work better to me. So I took the water pump. The water pump was brand new. When I pulled it off there, it was so clean. I just ended up painting it black and reusing it. A lot of these parts were just freshly new, because the motor had been gone through. And as a matter of fact, the camshaft that came out of it was a General Kinetics camshaft. Now, for those who don't know, General Kinetics was a company that used to make camshafts back in the day. And I don't know if they just put it in there used or what, or just something they kept on the shelf over the years. But or maybe the motor was redone as far back as that point, because the motor was fresh when I tore it apart. There was nothing built up or anything. And the fellow who sold it to me was right, He called it, because it really was fresh. As you can see here, I ended up getting headers, and I had to strip those down and paint those silver, but it looked a whole lot better when it was done. Then I started to tear into the motor, and likewise, as you can see, I obviously, this is a picture before I painted the water pump, of course. I ended up tearing it apart. forehand. But I started tearing it apart, and everything, once again, it was just so nice and clean. And those push rods were a whole lot better. They were just one piece solid push rods. They didn't have the little balls on the end of them, so I ended up reusing those instead. I checked and made sure they were straight. So the thing is, the heads were 882 heads, which are okay for a truck, but they're very they're a lighter casting, and you know, sometimes they're prone to cracking, but they were okay. I ended up actually selling them back to the guy I bought the truck from, because they were still in great condition. There was nothing wrong with them whatsoever cosmetically. They didn't even have gunk built up in them. In fact, I had to do more to the heads that I was putting on it than the heads I took off to sell them. So I ended up pulling the motor completely apart in terms of the top end of it. I let the bottom end of it alone, of course. It was just a top end build. It was a new timing set I put in there, and then I got a side-by-side here of the old heads, the intake. The top is the old heads, the bottom is the 487 heads. The top's the 882s, I guess you'd say. But as you can see, there's a day and night difference in flow that was going to take place. And these gaskets right here now, these intake gaskets, they were kind of a wives' tale. The theory with those screens was that the gasket is that they would atomize the air-fuel mixture, and you would end up actually getting better torque out of it. So we found those laying in the garage that my dad had, that he was going to put in his Caprice wagon that he had, but never got around to it. So here they were, and I was like, you know what, might as well use them, why not? So I ended up using those, and as you can see, I ended up painting the motor up and buttoning it up with the timing cover and whatnot. Then it was very satisfying when I ended up getting the valve covers, and you'll never believe where I got them from. I ended up getting them off Amazon, and they were really, really nice. I paid $80 for them, and normally these valve covers like these, they go for, you know, $150, $200 sometimes. But these looked really, really good, and the welds were good too. You know, I mean, I couldn't beat it for the price, and their fitment was good as well. And as you can see, I ultimately started buttoning it back up, put the water pump back on, and the intake manifold, and you know, the headers I ended up putting in there. They're very easy, of course. This is, you know, putting the stuff, working on a pickup truck like this, everything is so easy to put together and take apart. Everything you can get to. That radiator I also ended up getting off Summit Racing. That was a nice radiator. I'm really glad I went that way. And I was going to go electric fans, but once again, I sold the truck before I got around to it. So it was what it was. I hope the new owner kind of carried on the tradition of putting it more together, you know. So here it is with the Holley Carburetor. And as I said before, we struggled to get this thing running right with this carburetor. Even though I took it apart and put it back together accordingly, you know, I put everything together right. It's just the thing was, I'm going to guess it had problems with the float. Either it was cracked or something like that, because it just flooded the motor out with fuel. I mean, it poured fuel into it. So the floats obviously weren't included in the rebuild kit, so we just ended up putting that aside and put the Rochester back on it, because it ran so good with that Rochester on it before I took the motor apart. So we figured, why not? But we did run a spacer on it too, by the way. It ran really, really. And when we got it fired up really nicely. And I got a quick clip here. I'll show in a minute that of it running. But first, I want to show the exhaust. I got this whole exhaust system, believe it or not. I got it off of Amazon. It was about $150. And the only thing it didn't include was mufflers, which we just went out and bought some mufflers for it. Actually, I take that back. We bought them off Rock Auto because I wanted a quiet, nice, stock-looking exhaust system that just went up to the headers, and that was it. And this exhaust system went right together like Legos. It was really cool because it was all prefab stuff, and it was all clamped together, as a matter of fact. Everything just, there was so much room to work with. and these pipes were just, these pieces were so long that you could get away with clamping and you didn't even have to weld anything. So I was very pleased with this. When I get done with the Suburban that I've got going on right now, project-wise, I'll probably end up looking to see if I can find something for the Suburban when we got the engine all together. So, but for now, I just reflect on what I've had before and just go from there. And it's funny because these pipes were a better replacement because they went all the way out the back, unlike the stock or the exhaust when I got it was just dumped under the bed. So these pipes went right out all the way out the back like they're supposed to, and they just bent at a 90 degree behind the rear wheel. And it looked really good when it was done. There, as you can see, the mufflers are put on. There's the air filter that I got for it. It was just a little Spectre air filter, and I got that air cleaner as part of the intake, I believe. No, I take that back. It was part of the Vortec intake when I got it. He threw that in, but I had to get a better air filter for it. As you can see, the Rochester carburetor is on it, and you can see the spacer underneath it too, and it ran so much better. And here's a brief clip of it. It's about 12 seconds. And as you heard right there, it's very mild sounding. There wasn't anything too fancy done. It was just a mild cam with some better flowing heads, and I ported the heads on top of that. I was very happy with it when I finished it. And the thing is, the build I started in March of 2020, and I challenged myself because we were in the whole quarantine thing for COVID-19 at the time. I challenged myself to finish this mild build before quarantine was up, and by golly, I did it, because I finished it up in June, right before everything started opening back up. So, and I live here in Michigan, so the lockdowns were pretty brutal on us. But anyways, now we get into the slight chassis modifications that I made. I went on Off-Road Designs and ordered the steering box brace that they make for these, as these frames are prone to cracking around this area. And if I had held on to the truck, I would have gotten a lot more chassis reinforcement and either, ordered prefab stuff or fabricated stuff myself. But either way, I wanted to make this truck an actual functional off-road vehicle, more so than just a showpiece, because it wasn't entirely a showpiece. It was daily driven and stuff like that. So the truck was a 77. So the idea of this was for it to be a stunt truck tribute, because the stunt trucks they bought in the show were 77s and earlier trucks, because they knew they were going to destroy them jumping them and stuff. Not that I was going to jump like the trucks in the show, but I was going to take it off road and beat on it, so I considered it a stunt truck tribute. Even the harness inside, I was going to eventually end up putting a harness bar in it had I kept it. But either way, I did this right here, and you can see where it holds the frame and the steering box and kind of, keeps it all together. That way, so there's no strains on any critical points in the frame anymore. It kind of distributes all the pressure when you beat on this thing or just steer with it, because there's guys out there that have turned the wheel with oversized tires on these trucks and have had the frame just under that much pressure. Those frames are very prone to cracking. But it's cool that they make the kit for it, though, that keeps it all reinforced. And luckily the frame wasn't cracked when I bought it. And that was one of the first things I checked and made sure. And if I was going to lift it and put it on 35s, I definitely wanted a stout platform to work with, in terms of the chassis. I didn't want to end up breaking anything like that. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here by saying that this was easily one of the coolest and most fun toys and projects that I ever had. The only reason I ended up getting rid of it was because I ended up getting my dream truck, aka my 1970 Chevrolet C20. I've always had a heart for those second-gen Chevy CK pickups. To me, that's the most beautiful looking truck, the most beautifully crafted truck of all time. But I definitely didn't get rid of this without remembering how fun it was. There's my girlfriend and I. As you can see, I got the truck on the road in time for Halloween. We ended up going to a Halloween party. That was the first time I ever had a vehicle as part of my costume, which was really cool. It was part of my goal of having a Hollywood tribute vehicle, and I'd wear that hat too. As you can see, it's got the Fall Guys Stuntman Association logo on it, just kind of like in the show. I ended up ordering that hat custom off of a custom hat site. Luckily I was able to get it because I couldn't really find any hats anywhere else. Again, they don't really sell much merchandise for the Fall Guy. Greenlight Diecast, though, however, has started selling diecast of the truck, so that's pretty cool. Not the stunt trucks, of course, but the actual on-screen used. I think it was a 82 they used. The years varied throughout the series. So, but anyways, I went out and I took it on cruises and stuff like that, and I took it out to the Fort Street cruise and Telegraph cruise, and I had a great time with this truck. It was, and it was such a, like I said, people really, really appreciated it. I even had the privilege of meeting the fella in my area that has the General Lee, which was an actual on-screen used car. His name is he goes by the name of Brian Downing. Great guy. I'm very happy I got to meet him and get these pictures. This was one of the definite bucket list things to do when I had this truck. I definitely had to get side by sides with the General Lee, because both of these vehicles served a shall I say a jumping purpose in these TV shows that they were in. So, and there's a picture of me with the plaque that I got for I think it was 4th place in Autorama. Again, I wasn't even there to win any awards. I was surprised I even got an award, so that was a treat to me. I wasn't there to win anything. I was just there to enjoy good times with other people that are into the same passions and hobbies that I'm into. So there's a good picture of me and Katie. That was just such a great night at Autorama. Well, I'm going to conclude the video here on my 1977 GMC K15. As you can see, here's some still shots from the actual TV show. Obviously, a lot of different years were used. And as you can see, the truck saw a lot of airtime in the show doing the stunts. Like I said, this is why my truck is a stunt truck tribute right here. As you can see, they use the older trucks. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to consider this actually not so much of vehicles that I've owned video, so much as an actual video just on this truck being itself, because it was very special to me. And I'll probably end up doing something like it down the road, so stay tuned. Anyways, thanks for watching, everybody, and take care. Later.